Ostoj up one more time here to speak for us, so I'll give a big warm welcome to William Ostoj from Lee.
Nice job.
Let's write this down. Hello? Thank you. Hi, my name is Will Ostoj. I am a veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps. I'm a former detention deputy for the Olmsted County Sheriff's Office in Rochester, Minnesota, as well as a former police officer for the Mason City and West Des Moines police departments here in Iowa. I'm here on behalf of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition to speak about the legalization of marijuana, or cannabis, if we're going to go with the official term here. So who are we? Well, LEAP is an organization composed of current and former law enforcement officers and members of the criminal justice system who envision a world in which drug policies work for the benefit of society and keep our communities safer. Police chiefs and officers, prosecutors and defense attorneys, special agents, judges, federal marshals, prison wardens, and undercover narcotics agents, LEAP speakers are uniquely qualified to speak on this issue as they are intimately familiar with the negative effects of not only drug abuse, but the criminalization of drugs on our communities. Our members are all people who made a commitment to public service, people who desire to protect our communities from harm. And I'm here today to tell you why it is that we believe the prohibition of marijuana causes much more harm than it espouses to prevent. I'd like to read a quote that I think succinctly summarizes the main thrust of LEAP's argument for the legalization of marijuana and what I'm going to be speaking about today, and it is as follows. It is a tragic irony that more people have died or been injured from the enforcement of marijuana laws than any harms generated from the herb itself. The negative costs to society are a result of the legal status, not its pharmacological properties. This was spoken by John Anderson, who's a former corrections officer as well as a professor of criminology at Vancouver Island University in British Columbia. So let me begin by giving a very brief background of how we got where we are today, with the DEA classifying marijuana as being more dangerous than heroin and methamphetamine and declaring it to have no accepted medical use. In the 1850s, patented marijuana extracts were actually sold over the counter, and they were listed in the United States Pharmacopoeia as treatments for neuralgia, gout, uterine bleeding, and vomiting caused by opiate withdrawals. In 1906, the Pure Food and Drug Act was passed, and this was to protect consumers from adulterated or misbranded foods, drugs, or liquors. And this required medicines that contained cannabis to have a label on them which disclosed the concentration of the drug as well as its potential harmful side effects. It also prohibited the sale of cannabis-containing medicines outside of pharmacies and without a prescription. Now, in 1930, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics was established, and this was actually established to consolidate the enforcement of laws related to opiates and coca-containing products. And a man named Harry J. Anslinger was named commissioner of this agency. Now, Mr. Anslinger had some interesting ideas about marijuana and the types of people who used it. In a statement given to Congress in 1937, he said, "Here we have a drug that is not like opium. Opium has all of the good of Dr. Jekyll and all of the bad of Mr. Hyde. This drug is entirely the monster Hyde, the harmful effect of which cannot be measured. Some people will fly into a delirious rage, and they are temporarily irresponsible and will commit violent crimes." Writing for the FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin, Mr. Anslinger said, "A study of the effects of marijuana shows clearly that it's a dangerous drug, and Bureau records prove that its use is associated with insanity and crime. Therefore, from the standpoint of police work, it is a more dangerous drug than heroin or cocaine." And in an article for American Magazine, Mr. Anslinger said, "How many murders, suicides, robberies, criminal assaults, holdups, burglaries, and deeds of maniacal insanity it causes each year can only be conjectured." Now, in 1944, the results of a study called the LaGuardia Report were released, and this was a study that was conducted by physicians at the New York Academy of Medicine over a period of 5 years, and they concluded, among other things, that marijuana is not physiologically addictive, it is not the determining factor in the commission of major crimes, and that the publicity concerning the catastrophic effects of marijuana were unfounded and exaggerated. Mr. Anslinger, of course, responded by denouncing the mayor of New York City, denouncing the New York Academy of Medicine, and stating that they should not conduct more experiments or studies without his permission. Now, what's interesting is that less than a decade after characterizing marijuana as, quote, the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind, Mr. Anslinger then declared marijuana to be a threat because it turned people into stoned zombies who lacked the resolve to fight the Red Menace. During testimony before Congress in 1948, he asserted, marijuana leads to pacifism and communist brainwashing. And this is the man, ladies and gentlemen, who drafted, introduced, and testified to the necessity of the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, which first made the possession of marijuana a federal offense. In 1970, Congress created a presidential commission known as the Schaefer Commission, and it was created to report on the effects of marijuana and recommend appropriate drug policies. And corroborating the results of the LaGuardia Commission nearly 30 years prior, the Schaefer Commission also concluded there is little proven danger of physical or physiological harm from the experimental or intermittent use of natural preparations of cannabis. The use of drugs for pleasure or other non-medical purposes is not inherently irresponsible. Alcohol is widely used as an acceptable part of social activities. The report stated further, the criminal law is too harsh a tool to apply to personal possession even in the effort to discourage use. The actual and potential harm of use of the drug is not great enough to justify intrusion by the criminal law into private behavior, a step which our society takes only with the greatest reluctance. In summary, the Commission recommended the decriminalization of marijuana and implementation of a discouragement policy that was concentrated on the prevention of heavy and very heavy use. So what was President Nixon's response to the Schaefer Commission's report? Well, after attempting to influence the outcome of the study by telling the chairman that recommending decriminalization would make his commission look bad as hell, he ignored the report, rejected its recommendations, and proceeded to increase the size and budgets of federal drug control agencies and declared drug abuse as public enemy #1 in the United States. Now, President Nixon was legitimately concerned about the increasing rates of drug-related violence in the United States. His intent was to decrease both the availability of illegal drugs and the market for them through increased interdiction and enforcement efforts. By putting both drug dealers and users in jail, there would be in theory, a reduced supply as well as a reduced demand and therefore a reduction in drug-related crime. But we've learned enough lessons in the last 40 years to know that there are two main problems with this idea. Number one, there's never a shortage of people who are willing to take great risks to make money, especially in areas where there are no other options for employment. Anytime a smuggler, dealer, or cartel member is arrested or killed, there are 10 more lined up waiting to take his place, often willing to use violence to secure and maintain that position. In fact, a comprehensive review published in the International Journal of Drug Policy analyzed data from 15 studies on violence related to the illicit drug trade, and it concluded, increasing drug law enforcement is unlikely to reduce drug market violence. Instead, the existing violence base suggests that gun violence and high homicide rates may be an inevitable consequence of drug prohibition and that disrupting drug markets can paradoxically increase violence. So that's problem number one. Problem number two, there's never a shortage of people who want to use drugs. And who uses marijuana? Unfortunately, the perception held by many today is based off of propaganda and the not-so-subtle influence of popular media. In most any story about marijuana legalization, there are puns about pipe dreams, jokes about Cheetos, and references to Cheech and Chong. Accompanied, of course, by a picture of some dude with dreads and a tie-dye shirt taking the biggest bong rip you have ever seen at 420 Fest. But what you don't see are pictures of veterans who use marijuana to reduce symptoms of PTSD or chronic pain caused by injuries that were sustained during a roadside bomb explosion. What you don't see are pictures of the grandmother who uses marijuana to ease the debilitating pain caused by rheumatoid arthritis. What you don't see are pictures of the countless numbers of marijuana users who are completely indistinguishable from those who don't use marijuana. There's no doubt that some people use this substance irresponsibly or to their own detriment, but it should be obvious that in the same way you cannot characterize everybody who drinks alcohol as an alcoholic, to characterize all marijuana users as stoners is not only dishonest, it is not based in reality. I'm personally friends with many cannabis users. Among them are business owners, chiropractors, medical students, veterans, analytical chemist, civil engineer, patent lawyer, and television news anchor. To imagine these people, some of them parents and very good ones at that, being arrested and stigmatized for responsibly using marijuana in the same that many have an evening drink is insanity. Humans have a long history with drugs, and we've been seeking altered states of consciousness at least as long as recorded history. The fly agaric mushroom has been used in religious rituals in China for at least 4,000 years. Cannabis tea is mentioned in ancient Persian religious texts and described as the good narcotic. And of course, recreational alcohol use is described in the Bible. In fact, one could argue that everything we do is for the purpose of seeking altered states of consciousness. We read books to experience pleasure. We watch movies and listen to music to immerse ourselves in the emotional states that result. We seek stimulation or euphoria through bungee jumping, competitive sports, yoga, amusement parks, etc. The bottom line is that we enjoy feeling good, and we do things to make ourselves feel good, and marijuana makes people feel good. So regardless of one's personal stance on the benefits or harms of marijuana use, what should be very clear is that we are not going to legislate or arrest the desire to feel good out of people. And this is corroborated by statistics. Okay, America incarcerates more of its citizens than any other nation in the world. We incarcerate more citizens, we incarcerate our own citizens at more than 6 times the rate of China. According to the Bureau of Justice, roughly 1/4 of the persons currently under control of the U.S. corrections system have a drug charge as their most serious offense. According to data from the FBI, of the roughly 1.5 million arrests made for non-violent drug offenses in 2012, 82% of those were for simple possession. Of those, 42% were for the simple possession of marijuana. Now, that's approximately 650,000 people who were arrested for the possession of marijuana in 1 year. And to put this into perspective, imagine the entire populations of Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, Davenport, Sioux City, Iowa City, and Waterloo combined being arrested for possessing a plant. 650,000 people who now have criminal records that prevent them from obtaining federal loans for college and hinder their ability to find employment. And mind you, this is only over the course of 1 year. Over the past 4 decades, since President Nixon named drug abuse as public enemy number 1 in the United States, $1.5 trillion have been spent by federal and state governments in the war on drugs. Now, we're all used to hearing numbers like this being thrown around, millions and billions of dollars, but we're not really used to thinking in orders of magnitude like this. So let me put this into perspective. 1 million seconds. 1 million seconds is 11.5 days. 1 billion seconds, 32 years. 1 trillion seconds, 32,000 years. 1.5 trillion seconds, 47,533 years. So the point of all this is that since 1971, the U.S. has invested a total of $1.5 trillion in getting people to stop using drugs. We have the highest rates of incarceration and arrests for drug offenses in the entire world. And what do we have to show for this? Well, according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the U.S. drug addiction rate has remained essentially unchanged in the past 40 years. Data from that same agency indicate that marijuana use has remained the same or increased across all age groups. Surveys of high school students indicate that it is actually easier to obtain marijuana than it is alcohol, which is, of course, regulated by the government. And despite being the birthplace of the global war on drugs, the United States has actually some of the highest rates of marijuana use in the world. So history has shown us 2 things. 1, we cannot legislate or arrest the desire to feel good out of people. And 2, we cannot eliminate the availability of marijuana no matter how much money and resources we throw at it. So what are our options? Under the current model, the manufacturing, distribution, and sale of marijuana is left to criminal enterprise, ultimately putting money into the pockets of gangs and cartels. They have no concerns about murdering law enforcement officers, no concern about using children as drug mules or runners, street corner dealers, no concern about drug purity, no concern about using gun violence to maintain control of their territory, which just so happens to coincide with our city streets. Thankfully, we just so happen to have an alternative model available for evaluating the potential benefits of legalizing marijuana. As we're all aware, January 1st of this year, Colorado legalized the sale of marijuana to anybody aged 21 years and older. And of course, 3.5 months is hardly enough time to identify any solid trends, but here's what we do know. The first month of recreational sales in Colorado resulted in $2 million in tax revenue. And it's projected to collect at least $134 million by the end of the fiscal year. Data from the Denver Police Department show that the violent crime rate has been reduced by 6.9% and property crime dropped by 11.1%. The number of arrests for petty marijuana possession have decreased, of course, by 81%, meaning that there are now fewer citizens receiving criminal records that prevent them from obtaining federal loans for college and that hinder their ability to find employment. This also means that there's more law enforcement and judicial resources available to focus on violent crime. Now, some people may respond to this by pointing out what I've already mentioned, that the long-term effects of marijuana legalization in Colorado are unknown, and they would be right, of course. However, the long-term effects of marijuana prohibition are known. Hundreds of thousands of everyday citizens criminalized and incarcerated, some of them away from their families. Billions of dollars wasted each year as our nation struggles with funding education and healthcare. Law enforcement officers killed serving drug warrants or attempting to arrest drug dealers, drafting of children into the drug trade as dealers or runners, diversion of resources from prevention and treatment to law enforcement, subsidization of organized crime, and increased strain on an overburdened criminal justice system. At what point do we declare that our current drug policy has failed? The prohibition of marijuana is the product of a campaign of misinformation which was bolstered by fear and outright lies about the destructiveness of marijuana and marijuana users. It was fraudulent from its very inception. 58% of Americans support legalizing marijuana. 3 out of 4 American voters say the war on drugs is a failure. In a survey by the National Association of Chiefs of Police, 82% of police chiefs and sheriffs said that the war on drugs has not reduced drug use. So in business, if a company is failing, steps are taken to identify and solve the problem. In sports, if a team is losing, strategies are revamped and new plays are put into practice. In science, if experimentation and observation do not confirm the hypothesis, you ask a different question. What you don't do is invest more time, more money, and more effort in strategies that have not only proven unfruitful, but detrimental. Our nation's current failed drug policy has only survived by piggybacking on legitimate concerns such as crime reduction, drug addiction, and the welfare of our children. Supporters of legalization are characterized as members of fringe who are themselves drug users or sympathize with drug users, while ignoring or minimizing the alleged social harms of marijuana use. But as I've demonstrated today, this simply isn't reality. Concern for the welfare of our communities doesn't belong solely to those who oppose legalization. It is shared by those who are all too familiar with the harms inflicted upon our communities by this failed war on drugs. It's time that we do what's best for our citizens and our communities by legalizing marijuana. I greatly appreciate having the opportunity to speak to you today. I encourage everybody here to investigate this issue and form your own opinion. What's great about living in the Google age is you don't have to trust anything that I say. You don't have to trust anything that anybody else says. All of the information, all the arguments are out there for you to evaluate on your own and reach your own conclusion. At the very least, I hope that I have communicated why this is an issue worth thinking about, worth taking a stand on. And if you're interested in gathering more information, an excellent resource for reliable, objective information is drugwarfacts.org. All of their information is cited from authoritative sources such as government data, bases, peer-reviewed journals. It's indexed and searchable, so you can find information about any sort of topic you're looking for. And if you're interested in learning more about law enforcement against prohibition or getting involved, you can visit us at www.leap.cc. I also have some brochures and some LEAP swag over there. You got some nice pins if you want to pick one of those up. Otherwise, I'm going to be milling about in the crowd. If you want to come up and say hi, ask me any questions, I'd love to talk to you. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Hi guys. My name is Martha Hampel. I've spoken to quite a few of you actually out in the crowd, so you're going to hear my spiel again. I am supporting John Zimmerman for Johnson County Attorney. I'll tell you why I'm really interested in this, why it's important to me. My brother was arrested for public intoxication out of his own garage. He ended up in the jail. They told him, plead guilty, you'll get out tomorrow. He knew he was innocent. He pled not guilty, and they put a $300 bond on him. He couldn't afford to pay this bond. Family members had to pay the bond for him. The next day, he was able to get out. He decided to represent himself. He obtained audio and video of the arrest and was able to prove his innocence at pretrial conference. The charges were dropped 5 minutes later. The thing is, when he was in jail, they set his trial date 6 weeks out. So he had a $300 bond he couldn't afford, like most people, and he would have had to sit there for 6 weeks, innocent. And the thing is, almost 75% of the people in our Johnson County Jail are there pre-trial. They haven't been convicted of anything. Many of them are in the same situation my brother was in. They can't afford to get out. They don't have family or friends to bond them out. This is an injustice. One of the things John wants to do is end pre-trial detention for nonviolent victimless crimes. One other thing that he's really serious about and that I'm really excited about is he wants to pay more attention to real crime. We have a lot of sexual assault going on our U of I campus. Another sexual assault was reported just this last week. Stuff like this needs to end. Our police need to be more focused on what's important. They're preoccupied with nonviolent victimless crap, and it needs to end. So I'm supporting John Zimmerman for Johnson County Attorney, and I'd like you to hear from John a little bit more about why he's running. All right, here he is.
So, we heard some of the reasons why the war on marijuana is a failure, and why it doesn't make sense, and how marijuana is medically beneficial to a lot of people. And I think, actually, most people in Johnson County here already know that and believe that. But the law has not yet come into 2014. And so we have an outdated approach to marijuana in the law that most people think doesn't make sense, either for recreational users and certainly for people who use for medical reasons. And yet, throughout Iowa, including in Johnson County, folks who would easily qualify even for a medical card in much of the country get arrested and prosecuted for marijuana here in Johnson County. That should stop, right? Yeah. People should not be saddled with huge fines, with the inability to treat their medical conditions, and with criminal records because Iowa is slow to catch up to what people actually believe. And if I win, at least in Johnson County, prosecutions for marijuana for personal use will stop. Woo. Every day, including today, there are people who come up to me and tell me their stories about how marijuana is helping them get through the day with their medical conditions. These are folks who would easily qualify in much of the country for medical cards. And yet, in Johnson County, they're criminals. It's dangerous for them to get it. It's dangerous for them to use it. And every person who uses it, even for medical reasons that most anyone would acknowledge are genuine, are at constant risk of a police officer deciding to search them and derailing their lives. Another thing that I hear often throughout this campaign several times a week are the stories of folks whose lives are derailed by these prosecutions. Because when you're busted, it's not just in that moment that you go through a hard time. It's a lasting thing. You are arrested, you are publicly humiliated for being arrested. You have a long, stressful process. I've talked to several people who were students here at the University of Iowa, were prosecuted for marijuana possession, ended up dropping out of school. And so, does it make sense to have a community that is derailing people's lives who are minding their own business for something that most people don't even think is wrong? No. So again, if I win, that is among the things that will stop. I'd welcome your support. Early voting starts this Thursday, April 24th, a couple hundred yards away, right over here at Old Capitol Mall. Have a great afternoon.